This talk is going to be on fossils, evolution, and the flood, and whether the fossils validate evolution or they are evidence of the flood. Importance of fossil records to evolution, and I got a couple of quotes for this. The first comes from S.M. Stanley, a paleontologist and evolutionary biologist, University of Hawaii. It's doubtful whether in the absence of fossils, the idea of evolution would represent anything more than an outrageous hypothesis. The fossil record and only the fossil record provide direct evidence of major sequential changes in the Earth's biota. Another one is from Carl Dunbar, professor of paleontology and steganography, Yale University. Fossils provide the only historical documentary evidence that life has evolved from simpler to more and more complex forms. So that's basically the Bible of evolution, their interpretation of the fossil record. And they're going to defend the story of evolution till hell freezes over. But this is the main evidence that they have. They have other evidence like commonality and structure and in the gene pools and things like that, but that's just not any evidence that points to macroevolution in the past. Let's see, here's the Principle of Geology. It was written by Charles Lyell, and he was a lawyer. He took a few courses in geology in college, but he didn't pay attention to them, and he used rhetoric like a lawyer defense attorney does rather than presenting evidence. And he just wanted to destroy the idea that the evidence points to the truthfulness of the flood. And here's what this slide says. It can only be found in textbooks because it doesn't exist in real life. A Scottish lawyer named Charles Lyell made up the geographic column in his book Principles of Geology, published in 1830. He hated the Bible, so in desperate attempt to disprove the flood, he made up the layers and ages and assigned fossils to them. There is no geological column. Even Carl Sagan agrees that it doesn't exist, and he's an evolutionist. And so this lawyer, he wanted to change the idea. He didn't mention the Bible, he just attacked the Bible. And the idea is that the fossil record was evidence of the flood. Lyell said his goal was to free science from Moses. See, they had supported the truthfulness of Genesis 1 through 11. The science did, and he actually got the English Church of England to accept his books, and they put it in the colleges and universities, and they started teaching it as a fact and used his books rather than real geologist books. The Bible clearly teaches that there has been a worldwide flood, and it's throughout the Bible. We'll go through a few passages tonight. Genesis 7:20, the waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits, about 22 feet. Job 12, verse 16, they were carried off before their time, their foundations washed away by a flood. And he's talking about the people on earth were killed. Luke 17:27, Noah went into the ark and the flood came and killed them all. And that's a quote from Jesus. After the flood, God said the rainbow in the sky was to be understood as his promise that he would never again send another flood to destroy the earth like this one. But if Noah's flood was just a local event, well, God lied. There have been many devastating local floods since the flood of Noah's day. So what did God mean by saying he'd never again send another flood? It makes no sense. The book of Genesis uses a different word for the flood. Whenever it talks about the flood of Noah, it's a different Hebrew word than word for other floods, and it was a unique flood. It wasn't a local flood. Matthew 24, 38 and 39, and knew not until the flood came and took them away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. And that's Jesus talking about himself. Son of Man means he is the Messiah, that he is God, and he's talking about a second coming. And Jesus, whenever he talked about the second coming, he always mentioned the flood in context, so they would know that it was going to be a catastrophic event. It's going to be a real event. Jesus compared his second coming to Noah's flood. Jesus' return isn't going to be a localized event, it will be global, just as the flood was. The Apostle Peter wrote in his second epistle that only 8 people survived the flood. If the flood was a local event, people outside the area would have escaped and the Bible would be wrong. So it wasn't in the Mesopotamian Valley or anything like that. It was a worldwide flood. Here's a quote, very important quote from 2 Peter 3, 3 through 6, and just the important parts. He says, scoffers will come in the last days, saying, all things have continued as they were from the beginning of creation. And so that's the description of Lyell and his idea of the fossil record. And he said the present is key to the past. Actually, the past is key to the present. And he said, because the laws of physics haven't changed, why would we think anything on Earth would have changed? Well, that's apples and oranges. That's not the same. Uniformitarianism is predicted, and it says it'll come from scoffers. And they will willfully forget, these same scoffers, by the word of God, the earth was made out of water. And that's going to be the first thing we're going to look at briefly at the beginning. And the world that then existed perished, being flooded by water. And that's the worldwide flood. Granite rock is proof of creation. Science claims that the earth at one time was a molten mass and had to cool off. Problem is, the most abundant rock on the planet cannot be created by heat. If granite rock on the left is melted down, its properties change and it turns into the rock at right. That's rhyolite. Science believes that granite rock is created in high heat, high pressure of a volcano, but they cannot duplicate the process in a lab. So the animation video that exists on YouTube about how granite rock is made is 100% speculation, and it goes against science. So, and we've got another bit of evidence that it was created instantly here, and that is polonium halos. The granite in which we find polonium halos was never molten in the first place. And so they find these halos. I'll show you a picture of it. Next slide. And these are little explosions. And they have they're radioactive, and they have a half-life of about 2 seconds. So they explode instantly. So the idea that they were from a molten mass, you wouldn't have these polonium halos in them. And the idea that it was created in water would be much more consistent with these polonium halos. Here's the radioactive activity, slowly cooling molten granite. There'll be no radio halos. Radioactive decay, instantly created cold granite, you'll have radio halos. That's what we have. Radio halos, the polonium halos, are evidence of instant creation of rock, probably in the water, that God did. The Genesis flood was written by Henry Morris, the theologian, was written, John C. Whitcomb, who I got to meet one time. And he quotes in this book, by failing to defend the truth of the creation, the fall, and the flood as real historical events, the Bible, ultimately the church, has lost all credibility to the world when it relates to anything dealing with the physical world. And so that's true. It discredits Jesus too. And because he talked about Genesis flood literally, and he literally the whole book like 16 times as a literal historical event. And this kind of started the creation movement, Henry Morris did, and started to fight back against all the lies that have come from Lyell and Darwin. One big problem biblically, we can look at the fossil record, there's dead bodies in there suffering, they have broken bones and different problems, they have disease, they have cancer, and this supposedly the Bible said wasn't on the earth until afterwards. So some people said, well, maybe that was before. Well, God could have easily cleared that up, and there was no reason for it to be there other than that it was put there during the flood. There's reinterpretations, and these were all ideas that came after Lyell got the world to believe in billions of years or whatever in the fossil records, long ages, and that the earth was definitely old. So the idea of local flood, theistic evolution, I think is the worst, day age, that the days were long, progressive creation, the gap theory, the framework, hypothesis. I was a gap guy, but now that I don't think the fossil record was long evidence, I'm no longer a gap guy. These were all combinations and compromises with the lies that came from Lyell and Darwin. Here's an overview of the evolution hypothesis. Hydrothermal vents formed single cells which somehow became cyanobacteria and algae, and then evolved into fishes. Fishes didn't like it in the water, grew legs and lungs, and walked out onto the water. They felt it was too hot on land and walked back into the ocean, transformed their legs into aerodynamic fins, and became whales. Makes perfect sense. So we see fishes coming up on land. They can't stay up on land for very long. And I don't believe it ever happened. And this was an old ancient myth that they had all the way back beyond the Egyptians. Sedimentary rocks. What are sedimentary rocks? Sedimentary rocks are formed by dirt, sand, and rock that have been eroded by fast-moving water and carried to another location by water and laid down by water. All fossils recorded are found in sedimentary rock. On the surface of the continent, sedimentary rock varies in depth, averaging approximately 1 mile in thickness, with some areas greater than 10 miles thick. How did the sedimentary rock and the fossils get there? How long did it take? Let us look at the evidence. Well, they say it was all by rivers and by wind and rain, and it just doesn't match the evidence. Problems that must be addressed with the fossil record and how it got there. First, how were the huge volumes of sediments placed on the top of continents? How did it get there? It must have happened fairly quickly. What sort of transport and depositational process would generate such uniform layers over such vast horizontal distances? What caused the water velocities that eroded and transported the sediments? Here's Dr. Tim Clary, and he recently published his book, Carved in Stone, and he gives lectures, and it's about a 500-page book. It's not easy to read, but he was a geologist who worked in the oil field and knew how oil fields, wells, drills worked. And he got laid off and he got a job with ICR, and he's done an amazing job and came up with amazing evidence that really kind of validates the flood model very well. Carved in stone examines the sedimentary rock contended by continent, layer by layer. The data prove clear geological evidence of a year-long progressive flood, just as described in the Bible. Rock data do not lie. And so the evidence is there. He's got a great interpretation of the evidence. I believe he's got the right interpretation of the evidence. And basically what he says, this is a picture, not his picture, the plate, the cracks in the plate tectonics, the fountains of the deep all exploded at the same time on the earth. And I believe before this, the continents didn't move very much, but there was much shallower lakes and maybe smaller lakes in these different areas. And so when the fountains of the deep, Dr. Humphrey says they shot up 20 million miles, or 20 miles, not million miles, 20 miles into the air. So it went it was horribly fast moving. And so it blew out all the sediment that was in the ocean areas, and made the oceans a whole lot deeper, and rocks also were blasted out along with this when they went through the sedimentary rocks. So it was the mixture of sediment, and this is where all the sediment came from. It was all this area that was inside of these continents, but it was much shallower. It wasn't real deep. And so it had all this sand and sediment on the bottom, and it was all blown out, and this is where all the sediment came from in this catastrophic flood. Here, this picture, I believe, is from Dr. Tim, and so he said, here's the geologic column over there on the left, and he says that it was actually megasequences, and a lot of geologists are coming up with megasequence ideas. And it started off at the bottoms with the Sauk, where the water was low, and then another layer, a bunch of layers were laid down in the Tippecanoe layer, and then the Cassia, Abscorca, Tusuni, and Tejas. And so you can see where the level of the water was higher for each one of these, and so a big blast went across all the continents in these different times. We don't know if it was caused by the moon or earthquakes or what was going on. And all these ideas that these all represent millions and billions of years over on the left just has been proven wrong. So you can see there's worldwide Tepic sandstone, and this is what he has, and he saw this, and he took samples, and he could see where the flow of the water was across the country. It was all from the east to the west, and that there was he could see when the Rocky Mountains came up, and the different mountains came up, and he could see how the water started diverting in that area at the time the mountains started coming up. And so it's really proof of the flood and what the Bible has to say about it. Here's a quote from Dr. Clary. Secular geologists can't get around the idea of catastrophic flooding, but rather than entertain a worldwide deluge, they insist that it was as a result of isolated local floods, yet this interpretation doesn't fit the data. They have come up with these mega sequences, but they have millions and millions of years between them, different mega sequences, trying to justify the millions of years, but it just doesn't match the evidence. Here's a picture of sand magnified 300 times, and it doesn't look like that when you look at it through your eyes, and it looks like it was all blasted off by this high moving water that came out of the fountains of the deep that was corroding everything that was down there. Sedimentary experiments, laboratory experiments have shown that spontaneous sorting and layering occurs with a sand mud and clay slurry, that's sediment, when the mixture slows down and the sand, mud, and clay will spontaneously precipitate, settle out, and form individual layers based on weight. So we'll often do like 4 or 5 layers at one time. And and this is why you look at the layers when you drive through the East Coast. You have the sediment there, and they aren't layered out. And they have big rocks still in them and stuff like that. But you get over to the Grand Canyon, you got the layers because it went across the whole country, and that's where it started slowing down. And then the sediment started separating when it was laid down over there. So when I go out to the West Coast, I love seeing all the uh, sites out there in Colorado and Arizona and everything, and just see the evidence from the flood. Otherwise, everyone else just looks at it and say, oh, that was billions and billions of years. We don't know how it's happened. But now I say, like, how fast was the water moving there? What happened? Was the water backed up here? And you can see it. It's really, really interesting. Here's a quote: 85% of the Earth's surface does not even have 3 geologic periods in correct consecutive order. Young Earth evidence. So they in the books they show you that they're all perfectly in this level, and that the land animals are on the top and the sea creatures are on the bottom, but it's nothing like that in the fossil record. Then here's the evidence for a worldwide flood, rapid burial. Fossils of fish swallowing fish, buried and fossilized, must have been quite rapid to have preserved a fish in the act of swallowing another fish. Thousands of such fossils have been found. They're all doing that. Some are giving birth and doing other things. Fossils all over the world show evidence of rapid burial. Many fossils, such as fossilized jellyfish, show by the details of their soft, fleshy portions that they were buried rapidly before they could decay. Normally, dead animals and plants quickly decompose. The presence of fossilized remains of many other animals buried in mass graves and lying in twisted and contorted positions suggests violent and rapid burials over large areas. These observations, together with the occurrence of compressed fossils and fossils that cut into 2 or more layers of sedimentary rock, are strong evidence that the sediments encasing these fossils were deposited rapidly, not over hundreds of millions of years. Furthermore, almost all sediments that formed today's rocks were sorted by water. The worldwide fossil record is therefore evidence of rapid death, burial of animal and plant life by a worldwide catastrophic flood. The fossil record is not evidence of slow change. So they were buried rapidly, they were buried deeply. They weren't just barely buried, they were heavily buried. So here's a catastrophic pose, and this sea fossil was found in the Sahara Desert. Fossils formed when covered with water and buried quickly. What does this mean? If there are sea fossils in the Sahara's desert, Noah's flood. Land creatures found in the fossil record are typically found in parts. When complete bodies are found, they are in catastrophic death poses, indicating they were died in a catastrophic event and deposited in sea ecosystems. The fossil record points to a marine catastrophic event rather than gradual processes. So this one, I believe, he might have been electrified. This is John Morris in his book Young Earth. He talks about the fossils found in sedimentary rock and to see if it looks like the fossil records you see in the textbooks. 95% are marine invertebrates, an animal lacking a backbone, mainly shellfish and clams. Of the remaining 5%, 95% are algae and plant fossils, and 95% of the remaining 0.25% are other invertebrates, including insects. The remaining 0.0125% includes all vertebrates, animals with a backbone or spinal column, mostly fish. Very few of the fossils discovered are land vertebrates, and 95% of the few land vertebrates found consist of a single bone or partial bone. Carbon-14 dating is one way to date fossils that have been alive, and they know that the fossil record isn't evidence of just a short time. They know it's evidence of a long time, so they don't do it. But some other people have done some testing, but with radiocarbon-14 dating, that has a half-life of 57-30 years, should not be found in specimens older than 60,000 years, but they have been found in dinosaur bones, coal, diamond, and other ancient species. Evolutionary time must resort to contamination. The test process itself removes, contaminates. If true, it should only be for a few specimens, not all. So certain assumptions are built into carbon-14 dating, one being the level of carbon-14 in the atmosphere has been constant. If there was a worldwide flood, the C14 levels could have been much lower at the time, so that would give them a lot longer ages. The second assumption is the decay rate has remained constant, and things like being in the water, underwater, it increases the decay rate. Radioisotopes and the age of the Earth is a group from ICR and other scientists who went around testing the fossil record for carbon-14. The rate group checked for carbon-14 in diamonds mined from the Earth deep within the Earth. The uniform model suggests diamonds were formed at the very beginning of the formation of the Earth billions of years ago. The diamonds had significant levels of C14, consistent with the age of thousands of years, not millions or billions. The rate obtained coal samples from the U.S. Department of Energy Coal Bank. The samples were from the top, middle, and bottom of the coal bed, which supposedly represents different time periods of the geologic column. Those three areas. The coal samples were sent to carbon-14 testing, and all were found to have significant levels of carbon-14. The uniformitarian model holds that coal fields formed over long periods of time, millions of years. The carbon-14 level were consistent with thousands of years, not millions. One problem with the carbon in the coal, they have so much coal, they said it would only, all the trees in the world right now would only make about 15% of the coal that we have. But I think before the flood, the trees were huge, and they were around the Earth all the way up to both poles, and so there was a whole lot more trees because there's a different atmosphere, and they were all buried rapidly in the flood. Members of the Paleochronology group presented their findings at the 2012 Western Pacific Geophysics meeting in Singapore, a conference of the American Geophysical Union and the Asian Oceania Geoscience Society. So this isn't a group of creationists. These were regular scientists from Asia. Members of the Paleochronology group sent samples of dinosaur bones for carbon-14 testing. They got back dates that range from 22,000 to 39,000 years old, not millions of years. These are still older than one would expect given the flood scenario, but that could be explained by lower carbon-14s before and during the flood. Regardless, it is further evidence that the dinosaurs were not millions of years old. And do it take long time to form all these things? What has science shown to take millions of years to form? Diamonds, oils, stalactites and stalagmites, rock layers? None. However, scientists have observed each of these formings in minutes, days, or weeks, not millions of years are required. So this is all new science that we know that they all form rapidly. Charles Darwin said no organism wholly soft can be preserved. Jellyfish are 90% water, yet the world's oldest fossilized jellyfish have been found in the most unlikely place of Death Valley, California. The fossils were dated by the evolutionists as 540 million years old. The lead researcher noted that they were of really high resolution and had surprising detail. So much for Darwin's idea. Only a worldwide flood could have left this type of evidence. Dr. Mary Schweitzer, a paleontologist who was one of the first scientists to discover soft tissue, blood vessel, proteins, various blood cells, and even DNA inside fossilized dinosaur bones. If these bones were 65 million years old, they should not still contain soft tissue, but this finding would be possible and even expected if the animals were buried in flood less than 4,500 years ago. She got in lots of problems with this. She just tried to publish what she found, and they tried to fire her, and the creationists, of course, loved her articles, and she eventually came up with a story that said, oh, they were encased in iron, and that's how they last so long. And everybody's like, okay, that's settled science. Don't talk about it anymore. She proved it's not young, and so anyway, but she didn't prove it in a lab. It's just total speculation to try to cover herself. Dinosaur soft tissue, obvious evidence for a young Earth and recent global flood. Here's another one. He's a Christian. Dr. Mark Armitage from California State University discovered what he believed to be the largest triceratop horn ever unearthed. Upon examination of the horn under a high-powered microscope, Armitage was fascinated to find soft tissue in the sample. This discovery stunned members of the school biology department, as the article he wrote explains, because it indicates that dinosaurs roamed the earth only thousands of years in the past rather than going extinct 60 million years ago. Shortly after Dr. Armitage published news of his original soft tissue discovery, the university told Armitage, "We're not going to tolerate your religion in this department." Armitage, a published scientist of over 30 years, was subsequently let go from the university. He got a settlement in a lawsuit. So here's some soft things I wish Darwin had known about. You see these all the way down to 550 million years ago, supposedly soft tissue worms. All these different skins and blood vessels and all these things are in the fossil records, and they're not representing the millions and millions of years that they say they are. Here's a school of fish fossilized by the Genesis flood. A whole school of fish being fossilized together while swimming proves sediment from a flood quickly buried them. Because it took millions of years, the school would not have existed, and all the fish in the school would not have died at the same time while swimming. And see, they're all going in the same direction because the water was flowing in that direction, and from that direction anyway. And they've discovered a school of whales recently in Chile, and they all had to be buried rapidly in the flood of Noah too. Because God once flooded the entire earth, we find fossilized fish, whales, and other aquatic animals up on the top of mountains. Here, what are whales fossils doing on the Andes Mountains? And all the high hills were under the whole heaven were covered. Genesis 7:19. Here's some whale bones on the top of the Andes Mountains. The highest mountain in the world, at 29,028 feet, is Mount Everest. Fossils of sea creatures and sedimentary rock have been found at its peak. clams were found in the closed position, an indication of rapid burial, since they naturally pop open when they die unless they are buried quickly while still alive. The clams at the top of Mount Everest were closed, and hundreds of them were found in 1 4 cubic foot space. This suggests they were dumped during a catastrophic flood event. You can see the rather large fossils of clams with the two guys up there on the left. The Psalm 104 verse 6 and 9 kind of describes Dr. Clary's theory. You covered the earth with oceans. The water was above the mountains. But at your command the water rushed away. Then you thundered your orders, it hurried away. The mountains rose, the valley sank. The water went to the places you made for it. And so that's where all the sediment was blown out. You set borders for the seas that they cannot cross, so the water never again will cover the earth again. Here's Darwin giving a comment about the fossil records, and he expected to see slow changes of fish slowly turning into something else in the fossil record, growing legs and other things like this in the same creature. But he says the number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such fine graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which could be urged against the theory. And so I'd like to urge it against the theory. Darwin's prediction of rampant, albeit gradual change affecting all lineages through time is refuted. The record is there, and the record speaks for tremendous anatomical conservatism. Change in manner Darwin expected is just not found in the fossil record. That's Niles Eldredge. Stephen Stanley, the known fossil record fails to document a single example of phyletic evolution, i.e. a species becoming a new species, accomplishing a major morphological transition, and hence offers no evidence that the gradualistic model can be valid. Just the evidence isn't there in the fossil record. Here's a quote from Dr. Colin Patterson, Senior Paleontologist, British Museum of Natural History. I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. Somebody asked him about his book. If I knew of any fossils or living, I would certainly have including them. I will lay it on the line. There is no such fossils. Fossils show abrupt appearances, stasis. Stasis means they haven't changed. Extinction and not evolution. A Chinese paleontologist lectures around the world saying that recent fossil finds in his country are inconsistent with the Darwinian theory of evolution. His reason, the major animal groups appear abruptly in the rock over a relatively short period of time rather than evolving gradually from a common ancestor as Darwin's theory predicted. That's Philip Johnson quotes him in his book. The evolutionary tree that adorns their textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of the branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. That's from Stephen Gould. He's an evolutionist. He thinks it's reasonable. I don't think it is reasonable that there should be them in there, and it's not like that in the fossil record, and there's no evidence to believe that. And all there are the tips of the tree, and the tree just isn't there. Warped strata is another evidence of that this was soft material when it was bent. Scientists holding the uniformitarian view believe the rock at some time, the warp strata, became very hot and the heat allowed the pressure to cause the rock to bend. However, if this heating had truly occurred, the sedimentary rock would turn into metamorphic rock just as limestone turns into marble. The heat would have destroyed any fossils inside that rock, but this is not the case since we observe bent limestone containing fossils. So it would have changed it to metamorphic rock. It's not metamorphic rock in the bent strata, and there are fossils in it. So their idea, their model, how it happened, just doesn't match the evidence. Polystrate trees were buried rapidly, and that was in the middle of Vega sequences, and it couldn't have been millions of years as evolution claims. Here's radio dating methods are used on a number of untested assumptions that produce old age results. So radioactive dating, and they do this with igneous rock. It is formed on lava, and they can age the lava between the layers to kind of get an idea, they think, of how old they are. Problems with this: past atmosphere's conditions, solar activity, volcanic activity, state of the Earth's magnetic field, decay rates of radioactive elements, and other factors are simply unknown. Most dating techniques actually indicate that the Earth is young, not old. There's three assumptions that they have. The rate of decay has always been constant. The quantity of parent or daughter atom were known at the time the rock formed. For example, uranium was 100%, while when the rock was sulfide, and there was 0% lead present at the time. So they try to see what percentage of the uranium turned into lead, and that's how they calibrate it. No outside influence has affected the decay rate. No parent or daughter elements were lost or gained, and nothing affected the rate at any time. So those are assumptions that they just can't be proven. 5 samples from Mount St. Helens dated from 1.5 to 3 million years old from 11-year-old rock. They knew the age of the rock when it hardened, and they got all these long ages from it. So there's the different domes where they got the different ages from the different domes. So here's a bunch of known dates on the different volcanoes, and shows how they're all these long ages. And one from 1859 in Hawaii showed 1.7 to 15.3 million years old. And so these just show that the rates were never calibrated to anything in real life, and they should have been calibrated from known data rocks before they just assumed how old they were. Here's an article, Popular Science article, strange unexpected solar influences over the Earth's radioactive material could herald solar flares. The article states all this goes back to 2006 when physicists at Purdue, Stanford, and other places noted something that at first defied physical examination. Radioactive elements were changing their decay rates. This flew in face of long accepted physics theory, which held that these rates are constant. Radioactive decay apparently grew more pronounced in the winter than the summer. This changes the assumptions that decay rates are constant. So this was a problem that they even reported from science, that decay rates were a problem. Circular reasoning is what they do is strata are dated by the fossils, and the fossils are dated by the strata. That's not science at all, just lies based on another lie. You cannot carbon date fossils, which wouldn't help anyway because they're already proven radioactive data to be inaccurate. This is all circular reason. Here's a good quote from W.D. Sanfield, instructor of biology in Polytech State University. All the above radiometric methods for dating the age of the Earth, its various strata, and its fossils are questionable because the rates are likely to have fluctuated widely over Earth's history. It is obvious that radiometric techniques may not be the absolute dating methods that they are claimed to be. Age estimates on a given geological stratum by different radiometric methods are quite different, sometimes by hundreds of millions of years. There is absolutely no reliable long-term radiological clock. The uncertainties inherent in radiometric dating are disturbing to geologists and evolutionists, but they don't talk about it much. They think, oh, we have absolute evidence. Flood hydrosorting, some thoughts on this. Dinosaurs such as sauropods and theropods would have little ability to swim due to their body sizes, types, and would have been weighed down in the coming floodwaters. So they would have been higher up. They wouldn't get buried, but they would get buried at the end. And they would probably be the most likely of the land dwellers to get buried. Land-dwelling mammals would have been the last to be buried, as they would probably treaded water for a longer period of time. Their bodies would have are more buoyant than the reptiles, so they probably would have floated away. Humans, as the most intelligent creatures, would have attempted to the last minute to come up with some sort of floating system. They would have all died due to a lack of structure and preparation, except for Noah in the ark. So this is the problem. Throughout the 20th century, human footprints have been found in supposedly ancient rocks, sometimes with dinosaur prints. In 1977, in Africa, 30 miles south of Ovia George, Mary Leakey found human footprints which, by the strata they are found in, evolution date nearly 4 million years in the past, yet they are identical to modern human footprints. These and other footprints disprove evolutionary theories, especially those which dinosaur prints are found with humans' footprints. Dinosaurs are said to be dated 65 million to 135 million years, whereas men are said to have appeared far more recently. So this was in Science News and National Geographic, 1979 and 80. So this has been validated by a spiral CT scan, and this is found actually in Glen Rose, Texas, and this is a human footprint with a three-toed dinosaur had stepped on top of it. This is great evidence that they were at the same time. Actually, these fossils, the sediment that they stepped in could be like sand on the beach. It had to be much harder. And I believe when the fountains of the deep opened up, the water that came from inside the earth was full of salt and carbon and maybe other chemicals, and this caused it to harden relatively fast. It still took probably over a year to get totally hardened, but this is why it stayed there and it was buried rapidly afterwards, because it was a harder substance. In 1995, human footprints were reportedly found in Turkestan. A local scientist led 3 expeditions to the dinosaur plateaus and found human footprints along dinosaur footprints, and he noted that if we speak about this human footprint as it was made by a human or human-like animal, incredibly this footprint is on the same plateau where there are dinosaur tracks. We can say the age of the footprint is 5 or 10, but at least 150 million years old. It is 26 centimeters long, which Russian size 43, US 95. We considered that whoever left the footprint was taller than we were. So now scientists are afraid to announce that they find a human with dinosaur footprints in our country, and they're afraid they're going to lose their job if they do that. But they're finding them all the time, all around the world. Did you know 10 human skeletons, women and children, was found in the same layer in dinosaurs, and this is called Malachi Man. And so, same thing, when they find these human bones, they don't find very many of them, but they say, oh wow, they weren't really in this layer, they got mixed in later, millions and millions and millions of years later. But the evidence is there, they are at the same level. Cambrian explosion, 300 fully formed body plans, not one transitional form from a single cell organism is found. Here's a quote from Mark Cahill. In the period that paleontologists call the Cambrian explosion, virtually every major animal group appeared suddenly from nowhere, with no transitional form preceding them. So instead of animals diverging from a common parent, what the fossil record shows is that all the major groups arose abruptly at one time. Think about that. Does the evidence support the theory of life evolved gradually by accident, or does it point to a creator? So they're just not there. This is in the Cambridge explosion. There are trilobites there. Trilobite eyes have the most sophisticated eye lenses ever produced by nature. That's Science News. The eyes of early trilobites have never been exceeded for complexity or acuity. So how did these evolve so quickly, supposedly? Of course, if it was buried in a flood, it didn't make perfect sense. Charles Darwin himself said the sudden appearance of trilobites with no apparent antecedents and absence of other fossils is undoubtedly of the gravest nature to my theory. So it's a big problem. His theory has a lot of problems. The long age of the fossil record, it has a lot of problems. The fossil record contains no trace of these preliminary stages in the development of many-celled organism. Robert Jastrow. David Berlinski, in his book The Devil's Delusion, there are gaps in the fossil graveyard, places where there should be intermediate forms, but there is nothing whatsoever. Instead, no paleontologist denies that this is so. It's simply a fact. Darwin's theory and the fossil record are in conflict. He's not a Christian. Overwhelming evidence for evolution, huh? Tell me more about the animals and transitions not found in the fossil record. So, out-of-place objects of the fossil record, I want to look at a few of them. This is the London hammer. It was discovered by hikers in Texas in 1936 and was embedded in the limy rock concretion originating from the Cretaceous rock formation 400 million years ago. The hammerhead consisted of 96.6% iron, 2.6% chlorine, and 0.74 sulfur, and has not rusted since its discovery. This discovery greatly questions our understanding of human evolution and Earth's timeline. So this is great. It couldn't have been created in the present environment, so this was something that was created in the pre-flood environment, and it's that high percentage of iron. It just had to be in a special container to do it on the earth now and not rusting. It just was amazing, and this is evidence of humans before the flood. Also, they found this bell in 600 million year old rock in 1851, and this is a zinc and silver vessel. Doesn't look like it was put together by bacteria, does it? So here's a 500 to 350 million year old artifact, Carboniferous period. We know an amphibian or lizard made it, since they're the only ones there. So it's a little bell with a little figure on the top, and this was obviously done by humans. How do you debunk carbon dating? Finding doorknobs embedded in a 300 million year old coal formation. Here's what they found. 2.8 billion year old manufactured metal spheres. Bacteria must have done it, I guess. Also, another evidence is the flood. All these cultures have flood stories, and if it wasn't a real event, they wouldn't have come up with a story. And John Morris from ICR clicked more than 300 legends from around the world. So he found that, is there a favored family? 88%. Were they forewarned? 66%. Is the flood due to wickedness of man? 66%. Is the catastrophe only a flood? 95%. Was the flood global? 95%. Is survival due to boat? 70%. Were animals also saved? 67%. Do animals play any part? 73%. Do survivals land on a mountain? 57%. So, this is a quote from Warren Elman. It is now increasingly acknowledged, however, Lyell sold geology some snake oil. He convinced geologists that because physical laws are constant, it necessarily follows that all past processes act at their present rates. This extreme gradualism led to numerous unfortunate consequences, including the rejection of sudden catastrophic events in the face of positive evidence for them for no reason other than that they were not gradual. Stephen Gould, paleontologist. To many scientists of the 19th century, natural cataclysm seemed as threatening as the Reign of Terror. Contrary to popular myths, Darwin and Lyell were not the heroes of true science defending objectivity. Catastrophists were as committed to science as any gradualists. In fact, they adapted a more objective view. So they went away from true science and went to pseudoscience. Derek Inger, the former president of the British Geological Association, uniformitarianism triumphed. Catastrophism became a joke. But I would like to suggest in the first half of the last century, the catastrophists were better geologists than the uniformitarianists. And so that's true, and it's still true today. Fossils for evolution is wishful thinking. Henry Gee, paleontologist. No fossil is buried with a birth certificate. That and the scarcity of fossils means that it is effectively impossible to link fossils into chains and causes and events in any valid way. To take a line of fossils and claim that they represent a lineage is not a scientific hypothesis that can be tested, but an assertion that carries the same validity as a bedtime story. Amusing, perhaps even instructive, but not scientific. The substance of fossils hoped for the evidence of links not seen. So faith is the substance of fossils hoped for, the evidence of links not seen. It takes a lot of faith to believe that the fossil record validates evolution and is a record of anything but the flood. So we can be assured that the flood did happen around 2500 BC, and the Bible is accurate, and you can believe the Bible to be true. We don't need to compromise with any other lies from the Satan.